Right, hi Year 7. So it's Mrs. Warrener here, and I'm going to take you through a short mini lesson with some revision on the Renaissance and the Reformation, and then we're briefly going to look at source inference as well. And hopefully, that'll be really helpful for you guys to get you started on doing some revision of your own for your end of year assessment. And I know you're probably really, really excited about the prospect of doing an assessment. I know I would be. So try to contain yourselves. But there's lots and lots of fun things that we've got that you can do to, get that knowledge circulating around your brains, get your brains working again, get them really, really active. Okay, so we can see we've got our lesson title, which is our end of year assessment revision, as I've just said. So down the right hand side there, we've got a lovely picture of the Tudors with my favourite, Queen Elizabeth I, right in the centre. What a woman. I hope you've really enjoyed doing your lessons on her. She's a really fascinating historical figure as far as I'm concerned. Ruled England successfully for 45 years when no one thought that she would last as a young woman on the throne. So anyway, back to the assessment. So you're going to do one assessment on Schoology, just like you did back in January, or the vast majority of you did. It can be done at home, so that's no problem at all. You just need access to some kind of device, so a tablet or a phone or a computer will be absolutely fine. So sometime at the beginning of July, we will make that assessment visible to you. It's already been written, so we're all ready to go. We'll just push the button and make it visible to you, and then you can just have a go at that at home. So you'll obviously need to log on to Schoology for that, so please make sure that you know your username and password. If you don't know that, you can email me and I can sort that out for you very, very quickly. And the format of the assessment is really similar to what you've already done in January. So you'll get a series of multiple choice questions to test your history knowledge. You'll get one source question looking at inference. So I'm going to do a little bit of practice with you today. And you'll get one longer question. It says extended writing, but we're really just asking you to write a paragraph. Okay, so that's what we're kind of working towards. Okay, so as always, learning intentions and success criteria, even for a little mini lesson like this, you want to know what you're going to achieve and where we want you to be by the end of it. So we're revising the Renaissance and the Reformation. I would expect you to be able to recall some key facts after you've listened to my wonderful nuggets of wisdom. I would expect you to be quite confident to make an inference from a source, and I've deliberately chosen a written source this time because we've done, certainly in my class anyway, we did practice with looking at a picture source, and sometimes it feels a little bit different to make an inference from a piece of writing. So we're going to practice that together. And your stretch and challenge for you super historians out there is to think, would the Reformation have happened if the Renaissance never happened? My brain's hurting even thinking about that, but we might come back to it at the end and see what you think. So let's get started. So what was the Renaissance? So I'm sure you guys will remember the word means rebirth, and it was a period from around 1400. A lot of people would say it started kind of mid 1400s, when people became newly interested in art, science, architecture. There was a feeling that at the end of that medieval period, not an awful lot of progress had been made, and scholars started to question that, and they looked back to the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, and the golden age of Greece, and they thought to themselves, well, hang on, how did those societies make so much progress? And so there was a renewed interest in the arts, in science, architecture, astronomy, anatomy, study of the human body, so and lots of different areas. So lots of new discoveries. An example for you, and you'll come across this if you do pursue your history study into year 10 and 11, because we do it for GCSE. But an English doctor called William Harvey discovered through a series of experiments that the heart was actually a pump that was used to pump blood around the human body. Before Harvey made that discovery in the 1530s, people didn't know that. They actually mistakenly believed that the body produced blood in the liver, and that the body then burned it up, it used it up like energy, because they didn't know any different. And the Catholic Church said you definitely are not allowed to open up a body. That would go against God. So nobody ever looked inside a body. So doctors didn't really know how things worked. But with the Renaissance and people questioning things and doing experiments, doctors like Harvey started to do experiments. So he started to cut up animals to start with, to have a look inside and see what was going on. So that was a big discovery in anatomy. You've got the printing press, of course, which means they can quickly print lots of books. If you remember, in the medieval time, if you wanted to produce a book, you had to find a monk and you had to get him to write it all out by hand. It would take ages, and then you'd only have one copy. So Johannes Gutenberg, working in the 1460s, came up with a marvellous invention called the printing press, which meant now, providing you set your letters out in the right order, you could print pages and pages and pages of books really quickly. And that meant that these new ideas, so like Harvey finding out all about the human body, he could then print leaflets or pamphlets or journals, which is a type of magazine, and those, they could be bought and people could read about that, and other people would know all of that new information. So suddenly, not only were people experimenting and discovering things, but also everybody else was reading about these new inventions and new discoveries and new ideas. So knowledge spreads. And all of a sudden, we've got a whole revolution in thinking. And artists of the Renaissance were famously able to paint and sculpt much more lifelike figures now, thanks to all these new discoveries about human anatomy. Once they realised how muscles and tendons worked and how the human body was put together, they could paint the human body much more realistically than those medieval painters could. So a very famous statue is the statue of David by Michelangelo, which you can still see in Florence. And obviously I don't want anybody to be offended, so there we are. But nevertheless, a celebration of human anatomy there as a result of the Renaissance. I've seen that. It's you don't really get a sense of the scale of it, but it's massive. It's more than twice the size of a usual human body. So very, very impressive sculpture if you ever get to see it. Okay, so that's the Renaissance. Hopefully you're all feeling expert now. So then we go on to our second topic in this little mini lesson, which is what was the Reformation. So what was that all about? And why do they both begin with R? So the Reformation began in around 1517 when a pesky German monk, Martin Luther, decided to protest against the Catholic Church. Martin Luther was a very, very religious man. He remained devoted to God for the rest of his life. So he never rejected religion, but what he did reject was the way the Catholic Church was behaving. And Martin Luther, when he started to question the Catholic Church, he felt that he was sinful. How could he, a monk, one of the most holy men, he devoted his life to God, how could he possibly question the Catholic Church? So he decided he needed to punish himself for even daring to think these thoughts. And he made a pilgrimage, a holy journey, to Rome in Italy, which of course is the centre of the Catholic Church. And he went to the huge church in the centre of Rome, St. Peter's. And he thought to himself, well, how could I punish myself? And he decided that he would crawl all the way to the top of this huge church, 362 steps, on his knees. And the steps were made of marble, which is a very, very hard substance. And he went all the way up these steps on his knees. When he got to the top, he was knees swollen up, bleeding, bruised. And he looked up to the sky, expecting to feel some sense of forgiveness from God. And he felt nothing. And he decided that actually this whole thing about sinfulness and punishments just wasn't right. So he disagreed with lots of things. He disagreed with the sale of indulgences. These were pieces of paper that promised to forgive you for your sins and ensured that you would go to heaven. And Martin Luther thought, well, this is not fair on poor people because they can't buy as many indulgences as rich people. So does that mean if you're poor, you're less likely to go to heaven? Well, Martin Luther had read the Bible, and that didn't seem to be what the Bible said. So he didn't agree with that. And he didn't agree with the behaviour of Pope Leo, who was spending all of the money on the church, buying lots of lovely Renaissance paintings and sculptures, not helping the poor. So he wrote 95 complaints about the Catholic Church, and back in Wittenberg in Germany, where he came from, and he marched to the local church door and he nailed them up there. Thump, thump, thump. And he waited to see what would happen. He was denounced and he was excommunicated. And of course, in those days, if you were excommunicated, you were expelled from the church. And that meant that you were doomed to an afterlife in hell. So he's a very brave man. So despite that, despite the church's actions to try and silence Martin Luther and frighten others, it didn't work. His followers spread, his ideas spread, his followers grew, and they became known as Protestants because they dared to protest against the Catholic Church. And the Reformation, as we called this movement, spread to other countries, even England, when, of course, King Henry VIII broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1533 and set up his own church, which he rather unoriginally called the Church of England. So we have Martin Luther. And where was he going, ladies and gentlemen? I hope you were listening. That's right. He was off to hell to get boiled in a huge cauldron by some demons and put in chains. Oh, and have spikes driven into his back. That really looks quite unpleasant, doesn't it? So poor old Martin Luther. We'll never know if he actually went to hell or not, of course, because we can't ask him. But he was a brave man, and he started a whole movement, the Reformation. So that's the end of my little recap on the Renaissance and the Reformation. So hopefully you found that really useful. I'm going to look at some skills in history now. So I want to talk about sources. So sources, of course, pieces of information from the past that we use to kind of piece together what happened. So I'm going to share with you a source. Oh, where's it gone? There it is. And this is about Ramsey Abbey, which of course is just up the road from us. And Ramsey Abbey was one of the largest religious buildings in this area. They were hugely important, very, very rich abbey as well. So an abbey is another name for a monastery, a religious building where monks lived. So in around 1517, a local bishop wrote down a source, piece of information about what was happening at Ramsey Abbey. And he said, the abbot, which is another name for the head monk, is a bad-tempered drunkard, easy with his friends and brutal with others. The senior monks went off to play dice for money, accompanying their gaming with hideous oaths. Wow, that doesn't sound particularly good, does it? But as historians, of course, we probably need to read a source 2 or even 3 times just to pick out what the key message is. And when we're trying to glean messages and suggestions from a source, we call those inferences. So it's one of the really important skills that good historians need to have, that they can read or look at pieces of information and they can draw inferences about the past. So looking at the orange box there, we need to make guesses by looking at sources. Yeah, we've said that. So what do you think the message is of that source in the green box? What key words or phrases would you pick out which help you to understand how the monastery was being run or how the monks were behaving inside it? Just have a little read of it again and think to yourself, okay, well, these seem to be some really important words. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a little second read of that now. I don't know what you picked out. I mean, I do wonder about the word drunkard. That seems to suggest, even if you're not familiar with that word, you might be familiar with the word drunk. So it seems to suggest that this head monk is getting drunk, consuming alcohol, losing control of himself. I also think the word brutal is quite interesting because brutal suggests that a person is aggressive, violent perhaps. I wouldn't expect a monk to behave in that way. It also goes on to describe how the other monks behave, the senior monks. So again, these are the kind of elders of the abbey. Play dice for money. Well, another name for that is gambling. And again, I'm pretty sure that as religious men, they shouldn't be gambling for money. And finally, the source tells us that they made hideous oaths. Now, an oath is sometimes a word we use for a very solemn promise, but it can also be a word for swearing, which is where, when you swear something, it's also a word that we associate with promising, isn't it? So presumably these senior monks were swearing and using foul language as well. So there's a few interesting key words that jump out at me. I'm quite surprised to read that because I wouldn't have thought that that's how monks should behave. So next little bullet point down here in orange. Do you think the artist was being positive or negative about the monks? Well, I think we know the answer to that. What makes you think this? So refer back to the word or key phrase that you've picked out. And essentially, the final bullet point there is where you make the inference, isn't it? So you read the source. I can infer that the monks were getting drunk and gambling. This is because the source says, and then you give that direct quote from the source, that the abbot was a drunkard. The source also says monks played dice for money. So you use the actual words to back up your inference. Okay, so just a little recap there on how we go about making good inferences. Try not to just repeat the source, but put it into your own words and make a suggestion. Fabulous. Right, let's have a little review. So what we were hoping to achieve today was revision of the Renaissance and the Reformation, and hopefully you feel like you've done that, you've had a bit of a recap. So our success criteria: I can recall key facts. So can you remember now the name of the monk who started the Reformation? What's that? What'd you say? Martin Luther? Brilliant. Great answer. Well done. Can you remember the century in which the Renaissance started? Yep, at the back there. 1400s. Absolutely brilliant. House point. Superb. Okay, this is great, guys. We've done really, really well on this. Final question. I didn't mention this, I don't think, but do you know it anyway? Can anyone tell me the name of the European country where the Renaissance began? Don't confer. Facing the front, please. Don't fidget. Yes? Italy. Well done. Fantastic. What brilliant answers, guys. Well done. And second success criteria, I can make inferences from a source. Well, I've talked you through that one, and we'll provide a separate one that you can have a practice with more independently. So I hope that's been helpful for you guys today and given you a little bit of a starting point for your revision. We're going to provide you with lots of resources and things that you can do to help you just go over and remember what you've done in history this year. And if you've got any questions or any feedback for us, please email your history teacher. We're always really, really happy to hear from you. Okay, so remember, guys, history rules. Take care. Well done.